CISSPs and other kinds of things, and PhD level folks, to figure out what is the right training models to be pushing for, and what does it mean to say you're a professional in cybersecurity. This can be a tricky area to play with. And when I note that there are government leads for all these things, it doesn't mean that the government's going to provide the answers for all these things. Certainly, for cybersecurity workforce within the federal government, we're going to take care of, we have government people who are going to do that. But when we talk about workforce structure in the private sector, when we talk about training and specialization, a lot of that's going to have to come through collaborations with industry associations and the private sector.
So, Bill, does this slide mean that the government's going to create pay series for cybersecurity and then sort of map to that certifications that they have to have?
That is what they're going to attempt to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
DoD, I think, already has something in place.
yes, they're leading the charge, and if you've met George Bieber, he's part of this initiative, and so we're communicating with those folks, and if we can, take advantage of what's already been created and reuse it. But then you find little holes, and smaller agencies just can't quite cope with some of the things. So we have to find out what the blend is.
Yeah, because there's actually a couple pieces. Because I spent a fair amount of time with the CNSS and the development of national training standards across, but that's for NSS and not necessarily for the current cybersecurity workforce as you see it in Vision. And the next piece that I would see is this line of business alignment, and I'm sorry I came in late.
No, I haven't gotten that specific. So those kind of details I probably won't be really chatting about, but I don't mind. I'd like to bring them up. In fact, I'd like to note them down. The part you missed by not coming in right away was that I've been on this team since January, and so personally I'm playing catch up with all of the little parts of each of these component areas as we try to draft a strategic plan that we're running right now through what used to be called the ICI-IPC, which is a senior level government interagency committee. I think it's now called the Cyber IPC or the IPC Cyber. But they came back with comments. We're redrafting the document. We're going to get it back to them. And at that point, we'll be ready to post a strategic plan on the NIST website for public comments for 30 days. And we'll have a matrix and a process which people can do that. And we'll want to know, did we forget to write down, did we not capture something that you can imagine being part of NICE? And hopefully we haven't, because there are experts from these agencies who are stepping up to say, we need to talk about that. But we have sometimes well, I don't want to get into all the problems of how to draft a strategic plan. It's tricky, but we'll get to that. But I think the good news is, with CNSS, actually what I wanted to say is I've noticed in the last couple of years, CNSS and NIST and the folks who do the rest of the government policy kind of issues and standards around those are now ready to say, yours is really good. Let's just use that one. Let's not rewrite an 800 series because we need to make it an 800 series for CNSS. And now they map back and forth in a really good way. So if you're not in government, that's just a good news story that we're not duplicating effort as much. And this being a national level initiative is an interagency level initiative for sure, and representing all these agencies. So,
just to see if I'm understanding where you're going, it sounds like there's about 4 different levels of training that you're saying needs to be in place. 1 for the cybersecurity professionals, 2 for the federal and contractor workforce, 3 for the third-party vendors that we have contracts with, that it has to be embedded in their contract that those people we work with have to be cognizant of their responsibilities.
Sure.
And lastly, basically John Q. Public on the street.
Yes.
And OPM has sort of taken the lead, at least in the very basic cyber awareness through OLC2, Go Learn. Everyone has annual basic requirements.
Yeah.
And you said DoD is taking the lead on the cybersecurity professionals requirements. For the other 2,
they're ahead of the curve. I'd say they started to work earlier than many of the other agencies.
Which group or groups are really the authoritative source for what the educational requirements are or will be, or how they'll be deployed?
Well, so back on formal education, with education, the National Science Foundation, DHS is in there too. DHS has a big role. NIST is the lead. NIST got the job as the lead agency for coordinating the overall effort. So taking these 4 component areas and getting them to communicate in a way that we get something bigger out of each one. We know that cybersecurity awareness they've been doing it for 7 or 8 years. It's got a direction, it's got a plan, it's got its own strategy. But how to take that cybersecurity awareness message and start filtering into these other places. And then a lot of what we're going to do, and I'll describe it in a few slides, is the baseline. Who already has really good versions of something? So when you talk about those different levels of training, who's doing it really well? Is it worth duplicating that program? Is it missing something? So there's going to be a lot of studies that have to start in the near future. And I'll admit that NIST in getting the lead role hasn't gotten any funding to be the lead role. We just actually got our first set of dollars last week. So now we no longer have the excuse we didn't have funding. Now we have to actually do it. We have to figure out why if we say we're not going to start that now, we have to tell you why and justify it really well. So our job just got harder. But NIST has the role to get the best out of all these groups together.
For all 4 areas of education.
You've got a couple, yeah. So you call those 4 training areas, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's other formal education things too, curriculum and community college curriculum and K through 12 curriculum and things like that. That's going to be a different part of focus around education.
If that's what you're saying, that sounds like then it becomes part of the Department of Education's responsibility.
It will be,
as opposed to more of a national cyber awareness through outside of the school system.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The initiative has this clever name, National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, so you can say NICE. What gets left out of that actual NICE name is training and awareness. It's education, training, and awareness. And that blur of what's education versus what's training is what you're pushing on, and which is why we're being very careful in drafting a strategic plan. We looked at the goals and objectives that the group came up with, and there's always somebody in the room who can do exactly what you're doing, which is a good thing, to say, but I think you're missing, or I didn't quite hear enough focus on. And to get that balance is what we're aiming for. And then we actually will hope that folks who didn't get to do it because their you didn't know your agency was, you told me your government, right?
Yes.
So if you didn't know your agency had a chance to chop on this strategic plan before it went out for public comment, we're going to try to make sure that you know as a citizen and as a government person, you can still come in 30 days and say, boy, you're missing something here, and at least know that we're required to read through your comments and make some response. Sure.
Okay, but operationalizing these things has always been a challenge, and the DoD has found that as well.
Yep.
How is it that there will be some performance measurement framework in place? And is that part of this activity, or when will that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The strategic plan has drafted. The education folks put in a lot of interesting performance measures. Like by 2012, 50% of the schools will be teaching some specific course. There's some references to AP testing and some very specific ones that the education people, as they sat down at the table, were very confident in putting down as metrics. I would say the other groups were a lot less confident. We're still working on what are the right metrics. And so a public strategy might not necessarily reflect all the metrics, but the 60-day study that the White House is using as an impetus for a lot of the cybersecurity work certainly says, let's do some metrics to prove that cybersecurity investments make sense and they're the right ones.
Sure, and I presume that some of that measurement would actually occur after you put these programs into place and you're getting feedback from the operating organization. Yeah, and we're going to have an implementation plan that will actually probably just be on the government side, so that from a budget point of view, from an O&B point of view, that they'll have some, we gave you this money, what did we get for it? Is definitely, we can't avoid that part of the process. Some of those objectives step up, those metrics step up nicely. Other ones are really tricky, and that's going to be very hard to figure out.
So will everybody that is doing cybersecurity in government need to suddenly get some certifications or take some classes?
I remember going to the DoD.